created in partnership with the Thurgood Marshall Foundation, the Koch Foundation, and the Koch Industries. His sole purpose right now is to focus on the research with HBCUs and how we interact with education, criminal justice, and entrepreneurial issues. Gerard Robinson has a gamut of experience and titles that spans all over the nation. But the main thing that we must know about the person that is with us, he is a friend of Schroeder College. He is a friend of change. He is a friend that will do things to make us move forward, and he is an active participant in it. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce your son, but present to you Mr. Gerard Robinson.
Stormy, thanks for that very kind introduction. I know your president's got a long drive. I want to thank him as well. Some of my colleagues who spent time with me yesterday in two of our prisons want to thank you for that, as well as a good after-dinner conversation. So, when you hear the word criminal justice, what comes to mind? First thing. Law and order. NCI? NCI. Hand in the back. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
How to get away with murder.
How to get away with murder. Yes. Dealing with criminals. Incarceration.
Black males.
Black males. Injustice. Over here.
First 48.
First 48. Okay.
Criminal justice department period, like learning about procedural.
So the procedural stuff. All right. Anyone else? Yes.
Unlawful incrimination.
Unlawful incrimination. Everything that you mentioned are words that actually impact what we call criminal justice reform. As Stormy mentioned, I work at the Center for Advancing Opportunity. We're part of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, which represents 47 public historically black colleges and universities. The great thing about the work that I do at TNCF is that I invest money into students and scholars who are interested in one of our three topics: education reform, criminal justice, and entrepreneurship. And so we should have a conversation about this afterward. But the important point for me is there should be no conversation about criminal justice reform in the United States that takes place in the absence of HBCUs being at the table. It was mentioned by Stormy a few things that I do. I'm a graduate of an HBCU. My oldest of three daughters is a graduate of an HBCU. My father-in-law is a graduate of an HBCU. My mother-in-law is a graduate of HBCU. So I tell my friends I'm walking like I'm talking. But none of that would have been possible if I didn't start my career at a community college. I grew up in Los Angeles, went to a community college, open community college, same standards as you. Spent 3 years there, working a full-time job, taking classes at night, taking classes in the daytime, having to pay a little rent here when I could, having to do with a car that was a hoopty. But no community college, no Howard. That was my HBCU. I went on to Harvard to get a master's degree. There's no Harvard without having the 2-year college. And so I'm amongst family because of the work that you do. But I understand, particularly with the HBCU, that we have to be at the table. I got a real simple framework about life. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Or I can say that one again. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Let's go back to 2016. President Obama is still in office. He's the first president, sitting president, in the history of the United States to visit a prison. And he said, you know what, I want to do something about this. He believed that there was an education crisis within the criminal justice system, meaning that we have 2.3 million people who are currently incarcerated in federal and state prisons. 85% of them are primarily in state and local custody. The majority are not at the Fed level. They're here. Prisons went to last night at the local level. He said, what can we do? So a number of his friends and colleagues and advisors said, well, you know, in 1994, when President Bill Clinton, back in his own state, He signed legislation in 1994 that eradicated the opportunity for people who were incarcerated to get access to a Pell Grant. There was an interesting debate between 1990 and 1993 about the role of education in prison. On one hand, someone said, people in prison have committed a crime. They did a crime, they should do the time, and taxpayers should not use a dime to educate them. There were some state reps and state senators, actually federal senators and members of Congress, who said, when you give them money to, let me pick that, what's your name?
Sparkle.
Sparkle, let me just pick on Sparkle. If you give money to Sparkle and she's in prison, guess what? Gerard's not gonna be able to go to college because we're taking money away. There was a big debate, a lot of stuff. Well, here's what happened. 1994, you had nearly 700 plus colleges that had programs inside of prisons. They were offering associate degrees, some were offering baccalaureate degrees. Naturally, there were adult basic education courses, providing people instruction in what we would call some of the basics of mathematics and reading. We had adult secondary education. But college, post-secondary, associate degree, how many of you are in an associate degree track program? Yeah, they were basically saying if you were incarcerated, it didn't happen. But you should know that this has a long history. In 1965, when Lyndon Johnson signed the Higher Education Act of 1965, it's also worth noting that Lyndon Johnson is the only American president to earn a degree in education. He signed the law, and from 1965, 66 moving forward, if you were incarcerated in the United States, you had access to federal money. 1972, what we now call the Pell Grant really had an earlier iteration known as the Basic Education Opportunity Grant. It basically said, Gerard, Sparkle, we're going to go to prison, we'll get money, we'll go to college. Go to 1994, it was cut off. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people who were currently enrolled, over 20,000, were no longer eligible. So 2016, President Obama, at that time Secretary of Education John King, said we're going to use an option that we have. And it's called an experimental pilot option. And he said we're going to allow up to 12,000 people who are incarcerated to get a Pell Grant and to take classes while they're incarcerated. Over 200 post-secondary institutions apply. 200. Now, when you hear that number, what does that tell you? People are interested. 200 people. 67 were chosen. Of the 67, 3 are historically black colleges. Langston University, public HBCU, located in Oklahoma. Wiley College, private HBCU, located in Texas. Some people may know Wiley because of the Great Debate movie that Denzel Washington is in. And the third college is? Now, put that in perspective. 67 schools, 3 HBCUs, fewer than 20 are private, and even fewer than that are Christian or a faith-based institution. So you're in the middle of a revolution, and some people don't even know it. I had a chance to travel around the country. I've been to Wiley. I had a chance to go to Southern and other schools. Stormy and I met. She came to a national event that I had in Washington, D.C. CAO, we put together a national summit, 200 plus people every year, and we talk about criminal justice reform, education, and entrepreneurship. And Stormy said, well, you should take a look at what we're doing. And let me put in perspective what's taking place right now. There are a little more than 60 colleges that are still in the program. You're one of them. You're one of the originals, okay? You graduated 25 incarcerated people with an associate's degree in entrepreneurship. You did that. There's schools in this program that are much larger than shorter, based upon the fact they may be a baccalaureate granting institution. Some of those institutions also award master's degrees and PhDs. They're much larger schools, but you're getting the results. People are graduating with a degree in entrepreneurship. What can they do with it? A lot of things, and we'll get to that. But while you're doing the work here, Also know that there are other degrees that people are offering. Some are offering degrees in business. I had a chance to go to Bard College in New York. Bard College, even when the Pell Growth program decided to stop, they received private funding, and they've continued to educate men and now women in the criminal, who are incarcerated. I had a chance to go there. It was been a couple of years ago, and I was meeting with some of the men who were preparing for a debate. They have a debate team at Bard College, inside the prison. Just like your professors, the ones I'm seeing in front of me now, they teach inside. The same professors who work at Bard College are the same professors who teach inside of Bard. And he said, let's start a debate team. That debate team, in fact, is preparing to debate Morehouse. In fact, I think they won. And if they did, Morehouse alumni would definitely let me know. They'll reach out to me. They debated Harvard. They debated a number of schools inside prison. How many people have seen the movie Malcolm X or read the book? In the 1940s, Malcolm X, in fact, was at a very unique prison. It was called the Norfolk Prison, or Norfolk Colony Prison. It's one of the few prisons in the United States created by a guy named Howard Gill, who said, are prisons for punishment or reformation or rehabilitation? That's a 200-year-old question. What is the role of prisons in a democratic society? Is it to rehabilitate or is it to punish? He says, I want to try to rehabilitate. And it was a prison that did not have bars in some of the areas. It was a prison that allowed you to go and pick books as you wanted. Well, there was a debate team there. They won over 100 debates, lost fewer than 60. Malcolm X, in a passing sentence, talked about what it meant for him. So just know the idea of having a debate team or learning while you're incarcerated is not new. But what's so interesting is the work that you're doing. Now let's put this in perspective. 2.3 million people incarcerated. Little more than 2/3 would be eligible for a Pell Grant if they weren't incarcerated. Meaning, if you're not in prison, you would still qualify for a Pell Grant because it's driven by income. In 2018, 7.5 million people were receiving a Pell Grant. How much money do you think we spent? I hear some laughter, so you know it's a lot.
Billions.
Billions. What billion do you think? 7.5 million people. The grant max is about $6,095. How much do you think we spent last year?
About 25 billion.
25
billion.
25 billion. All right. $30 billion. Now that's a good thing because a lot of people are able to go to school because of Pell Grants. How much money are we spending for the program that we have right now, which is an experiment? $30 million. Now I'm going to put that in perspective. We're spending $30 million on a program to ultimately educate up to 12,000 people. There are a little more than 60 colleges who are doing it for $30 million. I put that in perspective because some people say it's too much money. I say compared to what? Not compared to $30 billion. That's number one. So it's less than 0.01% of your total budget. But the question is, either you pay now or you pay later. 650,000 people leave prison every year. 650,000. That is roughly the size of the city of Memphis. This nearly 2.5% of the entire population of Little Rock. 75% return to prison in 5 years. If I had an investment where I put in money and I got a 75% financial return on my investment, I would say amen. That's a good financial return. When I invest over $70 billion a year into our criminal justice system and 75% of the people come back, I say that's a human capital error and tragedy. And we can do something about that. We can do it by making sure that education takes place. Talked to men and women last night who are incarcerated. Some of them completed a GED while they were incarcerated. Some walked in there with a high school diploma or a GED, talking to people who are getting ready to graduate in November with an associate's degree. When people tell me that education for people who are incarcerated doesn't matter, I said, have you ever talked to someone who was incarcerated in prison about why it matters? One person said, I'm doing this because I want to be a better parent. As we're talking right now, at least 5 million children did not hear good morning from a parent because his or her mom or dad are incarcerated. 5 million. We know there's a 60% chance that if you have a parent who's incarcerated, that you will be incarcerated. 60%. And so they said, no, I want to be a better parent. I want to be a role model for my child. If I can do it, then you should be able to do it. I talked to a gentleman who was a lifer in a California prison. He was in an education program. People snickered at him. Man, you're not getting out. Why are you wasting your time getting an education? You can't use it. He said, I guess I can. You want to know why? He says, because today, I'm Papa. He said, I have grandchildren. He was incarcerated when he was 18, which meant that he was active before he got involved in prison. He says, when my grandchildren come to visit me in prison, I can look at them and say, guess what? Papa's in college. And if Papa can go to college, at my age, he's over 50, incarcerated when you're out, then there's no excuse for you not to do it. And the impact he said it had on his children, who he couldn't raise, and his grandchildren, who he really can't hug off. So it's a role model factor. Let's talk about women. Women make up approximately 7% of the national incarcerated population. But since 1980, there's been over a 700% increase in the number of women. When you lock up a mom, you lock up economic opportunity for that family. When 72% of our families are raised by moms who aren't married, I'm one of them, grew up in the same home, you change the dynamic. I'm not saying people who can commit a crime shouldn't be in, it's a different discussion. But I'm saying understand the collateral and the consequences that come with it. And so the fact that you've got women involved in this program is important. And they also say the same thing, I'm a mom, or I want to do better. And all of them are going to be entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is as much a mindset as it is a practicality. An entrepreneur sees a problem as an opportunity. A bureaucrat sees an opportunity as a problem. It's a change in focus. And so I'm going to stop now and open it up to whatever questions you have. But I'm here today because I just want to have a conversation about criminal justice reform, the role of education in it. Should it not be involved? Should we not do it? I got people who tell me, Gerard, I can't believe you're supporting public money going to a person who's incarcerated. He killed my daughter. But he raped my son. I'm now raising the grandchildren. Is that fair to me as a grandparent? Where over 18% of the children now are being raised by a grandparent. Is that fair? While we may think it's a good thing to have it, just realize with any policy conversation, there are multiple sides and this nuance. HBCUs must be at the table. When you look at the zip codes where people return, when they come out of prison, they're often coming back to zip codes where our schools are located and where we live. So we may as well say if 95% are coming out, 95% are coming out, what are we going to do? So I'm going to stop and see what questions you have for me. Yes, sir. And you just tell me your name and your major.
My name is Sergio Garcia. My major is General Studies. I'm also the president of SPA.
Okay.
Due to the fact that this is fresh, where would you like to see it in the next 5 years?
What I'd like to see in the next 5 years. First of all, thank you for your leadership on campus. What I want to see is this. The First Step Act was signed by President Trump, 2 months ago. I had a chance to be involved in some of the early conversations on what it could look like. The fact that you had a bipartisan approach on how to address criminal justice, I think is a step in the right direction. So for me, I want to see more bipartisanship in this area. There's so much partisanship in other areas, this might be the one area where we can bring people together. That's number one. Number two, in the First Step Act, there's language in there about academic programs. Academic programs could be college, but I also accept the fact that the majority of people who are incarcerated will earn a GED, will do adult basic education, adult secondary education. Everyone's not going to earn a post-secondary degree. I'm fine with that. I just want academic programs to expand from adult basic all the way to baccalaureate. I'd like to see Masters, but I'll take what I can get right now. That's the second thing. Third thing I would like to see is a research component. One of my critiques about the experimental initiative that President Obama supported is that it didn't come with a research component. Because you know what's going to happen. Someone's going to ask, did it work? And what you don't want to say is, well, what happened was, we don't want that. So I would like to see a research component. This is something at my center, I would be interested in funding scholars who want to take a look at research. I want a 3 to 5 year research part. We can look at whether it's been random control trial or not, but I'd like to see research. Fourth thing I would like to see is you millennials see this issue as one of your civil rights issues of the year. Of your generation. I celebrated a birthday yesterday. Just by looking at some of the people we spoke to, I was probably the oldest guy in there in many instances, and that's okay. What's interesting, the number of people under 30, under 35, you're the most likely to, just because of age, more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. And if you're a juvenile justice involved youth, more so. So I'd like to see you own this, just not as a criminal justice issue, but as an issue of human dignity. And what does it mean? And the fifth and last thing I'd like to see is colleges own this as something that is a part of their mission. Now let's be real frank. Colleges are a business. Nothing wrong with that. Colleges are a business. I know some college presidents and trustees said, I like the idea, but I don't want to be known as the prison school. They said, because I don't want to mess up my university brand. And brands come with millions and millions of dollars, and then when they're hit, you can lose millions and millions of dollars. I've had other executives say, I don't want anybody on my campus who's committed a crime. I said, I hate to tell you, but they're already on campus.
Oh, that's right. No, that's right.
And some of them on staff and in your administration. So the fact that you're at A&D school, with a history going back to Richard Allen, with a history going back to the same time that the American founding generation was trying to make sense of what a constitution meant and what it meant for a developing nation, you were talking about education. You were talking about building places for widows. You were talking about doing something for people who found themselves in bad shape. Those are the 5 things that I'd like to see in the next 5 years.